The movement I chose is a volleyball float serve. First, we are going to look at the starting point for my serve. We will be analyzing the shoulder girdle first. All the osteokinematic movements I mentioned are an isometric contraction type to hold the arm in this position. The first movement is scapular retraction. The muscles used for this movement are the rhomboids and the upper, middle, and lower trapezius. The next movement is scapular elevation. This includes the upper and middle trapezius, rhomboids, and levator scapulae. The shoulder girdle is also in upward rotation. The muscles responsible for this movement are the upper and lower trapezius as well as the serratus anterior. This position also has a slight scapular tilt, where the pectoralis minor is the muscle responsible. The next thing we are going to analyze in this picture is the movements of the shoulder joint. These movements are also going to be isometric. The first osteokinematic movement we are going to look at is extension. The muscles responsible for holding the shoulder joint in extension are the posterior deltoid, latimus dorsi, teres major, and the sternal portion of the pectoralis major. The shoulder is also externally rotated by the posterior deltoid, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Additionally, the posterior deltoid and infraspinatus help to horizontally abduct the shoulder joint. Next, we will be looking at the elbow and forearm in this picture. The forearm is in neutral, while the elbow is in flexion. The elbow is able to remain in flexion from the biceps brachii, brachialis, and the brachioradialis. Now we will move on to analyzing the wrist. The extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, as well as the extensor carpi ulnaris, isometrically contract to keep the wrist in extension. Additionally, the wrist is in slight radial deviation thanks to the extensor carpi radialis longus, which is also isometrically contracting. The last thing we will be looking at is the hand. The extensor digitorum, extensor indicis, extensor digiti minimi, and the lumbrical muscles isometrically contract to maintain finger extension. The fingers are also abducted. This is due to the dorsal interossi and the abductor digiti minimi muscles. The thumb is also abducted and extended. The abductor pollis longus and brevis help keep the thumb abducted. Meanwhile, the extensor pollis longus, extensor pollis brevis, and abductor pollis longus help keep the thumb extended. These are all isometric contractions. Now let's look at the ending point of the movement. Now we will see what upper extremity movements are needed to get our body into this position. First, we will be looking at the shoulder girdle. The upper and lower trapezius, as well as the serratus anterior, concentrically contract to form upward rotation of the shoulder girdle. Also at the shoulder girdle, protraction is happening from a concentric contraction of the serratus anterior and pectoralis minor. There is also a slight anterior scapular tilt thanks to the pectoralis minor concentrically contracting. Now let's take a look at the shoulder joint. In this position, the shoulder joint is horizontally adducting from the concentric contraction of the pectoralis major, anterior deltoid, and coracobrachialis. Muscles are also concentrically contracting to form internal rotation and shoulder flexion at the shoulder joint. Internal rotation is able to occur from the anterior deltoid, pectoralis major, subscapularis, teres major, and latimus dorsi. Shoulder flexion occurs from the contraction of the anterior deltoid, coracobrachialis, and the clavicular portion of the pectoralis minor. Next, we will look at the elbow and the forearm. The forearm is now in pronation because of the concentric contraction of the pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and the brachioradialis. The elbow is now in extension because of the concentric contraction of the triceps brachii. Moving on, now we will look at the wrist. The wrist remains in extension thanks to the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, as well as the extensor carpi ulnaris. Thanks to the concentric contraction of the flexor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi ulnaris, the wrist is now able to go from slight radial deviation to this neutral position as seen in the picture. Next, we will now look at what is happening with the hand. The hand is in the same positioning, so the contraction type stays isometric. The fingers are extended thanks to the extensor digitorum, extensor indicis, extensor digiti minimi, and lumbrical muscles. The fingers have also stayed in abduction thanks to the dorsal interossi and abductor digiti minimi. The thumb is also still abducted and extended, with the abductor pollis longus and brevis for abduction, and extensor pollis longus, extensor pollis brevis, and abductor pollis longus for thumb extension.